gee, my brain works. I should do something with it. So here I am. I think I might have quit working.
Yeah. I forget, where were you working before that? You were working as
I worked in a printing factory up in Rhinelander.
Yeah.
That was called Print Pack back then. It was so, wow. But yeah, and, you know, step outside your comfort zone, take a check,
Yeah.
calculate a risk, and good things might happen.
Yeah. Are you plugged in tonight?
Yeah, these. Yep.
So that doesn't plug into your hearing aid, does it?
No, it's broadcasted, but it makes a big difference.
So it comes right to,
Goes right to the hearing aids.
so there's a speaker right up there by your hearing aids. Right.
There's a microphone in the hearing aids, and it picks up the signal from here. So, but yeah, I can hear everything, which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to hear what's going on. That ain't good.
Yeah. It isn't good. Like at the valve there, it was
Hard?
at the valve, it was hard to hear.
Yeah.
Especially hard to hear.
Yeah. And my hearing is, if there's a lot of background noise, I can't focus on the one thing. My hearing doesn't focus on one thing, so everything gets drowned out. And this way it comes right to the hearing aid, so it makes a big difference.
Okay. I'm going to read what Julie sent us here.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Dave.
Hi.
How are you doing tonight?
Well, I've been better.
We were having burritos and roast chopped up with avocado, and you know when you slice it in half and you pop it open, the avocado pit just pops up. And my little dog is just, she's a food hound. She nabbed it up and told me to drop it. She swallowed it down through
Well, you're going to have an avocado tree
inside the dog's mouth.
inside the dog, yes.
Higher than peroxide. So, needless to say, our supper was not very restful.
Well, I'm glad your dog's okay.
That's what I came from the supper. Burritos with avocado, roast beef, the avocado, sea taco,
There's something in there.
Jeez.
order, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we'll go on to the roll call.
Dr. Dave Bardo,
Here.
Dr. Noel Deep,
Here.
Wayne Gagnon,
Here.
Jill Maddick Nelson,
Here.
Andy Mary,
Here.
Mary Newfeld,
Here.
Danny Pyatt,
Here.
J.D. Schrader, Angel Zimmerman,
Okay, and we will go on to public comment, and we welcome all of our visitors to this board meeting. I would like to take this time to remind all of us how tonight's proceedings will work. You must be signed in to speak during public comment, and your time will be limited to 5 minutes. As is the protocol for our regularly scheduled board meetings, we will not be taking comments or questions from the audience. So that everyone can hear, please refrain from having side conversations. As with our students, we expect everyone here to remain respectful. And if you want to speak tonight and haven't signed in yet, please come forward and do so. And Mary Kay. The first person is Jenny Aingartner.
I'm going to keep this short and sweet, but can you check the audio to make sure that it's working online? Because the last time I spoke, it wasn't working.
Justin says thumbs up.
Thumbs up, okay. Well, I hear there was a community play last week. Yeah, and Mr. Gagnon,
Yeah.
yeah. You were in the play,
Yes, I was.
yeah, along with Nurse Jansen,
Yes.
without a mask.
The only time we were without a mask is when we were on stage. Backstage in the
but-
presence of other people, we had our masks on.
Okay, but you were on school property. You voted for this mask mandate for our children and the school staff.
Right.
So can the school staff say, oh, the only time I wasn't wearing a mask is when I was in the hallway? Or that, can you give me a logical reason?
Social distancing.
Social distancing. I saw pictures. You weren't 6 feet apart.
There was only,
Okay, but can the teachers, they can stay 6 feet apart from their students. Is that acceptable for them not to wear a mask?
when this teacher is in a classroom with a student, he may be 6 feet away from them. But the classroom is a lot more crowded and a lot more congested
have
than
to
a
say
hallway
is it
and
takes-
backstage.
It takes some audacity. What you did takes some audacity. That's it. That's all I got to say.
Okay, thank you. Next is Angie Schreiber.
Hi, so I want to talk about the critical race theory, or what you guys call the ICS training. So a little bit, first of all, I want to tell a little bit about me that a lot of people don't know. So I came from a really rough childhood, okay? I didn't have parents, really. My family members didn't really want me. I was kind of kicked around like an old shoe. And I went from having straight D's and F's to doing a complete turnaround. And the reason for that is because I had positive teachers and I had good coaches. And it wasn't because of ICS training. It was because of mentorship. And it was good teaching. And teachers that believed in me. So I just want to say that I'm that kid. Okay? I came from the bad house, the bad family or whatever. We were poor as dirt. We didn't have anything. So why am I telling you that? Because ICS doesn't promote equality or equity, but what it does is it enables no accountability and entitlement. It doesn't teach or promote skills for the real world. My daughter is, she's now in 8th grade, but when she was in 6th grade, she had the SEL class. She was having a bad day. And she told me that the teacher told her she could sit under the table the entire class. And I said, why was that? She said, well, because I was having a bad day. I said, well, what did that teach you? Well, I could just chill out. You tell me, if any one of you is having a bad day, Doctor, do you get to chill out and sit under your desk? Andy, do you? Dr. Sprague, do you? No, that's not the real world. We don't get to just chill out and sit under a desk or under a table. So what is that teaching our kids? That doesn't teach them any real world skills. Right? If we don't teach the kids real world skills, they won't learn how to deal with the realities of life, like disappointment, stress, failure, accountability, responsibility. We are setting them up for not only failure, but also a higher probability of alcohol and drug abuse. Because if they can't deal with real life, that's where they're going to go. That's where they're going to be headed. They're going to be looking for the escapes. My point is, rather than ICS, maybe we should be looking at mentoring and life coaching. Maybe that's the way to go. So lastly, I have 2 specific questions. First is geared towards Dr. Sprague. I want to know, what was the total price that our school has paid for the ICS training for the staff? That question has been posed to you already by Dave Bardo on, I believe, September 24th. There's been no answer to that. At last night's critical race theory meeting, it was mentioned that there was a certain ICS points that were non-negotiable, but no one seems to know any information on any of these ICS points that staff are being trained on. So I have put in a formal written information request for copies of all ICS modules sent or presented to staff to Mary Kay today, with the reply date of this Friday. And regarding the question specifically to Dr. Sprague about the price tag, I would like a formal response to that by Thursday at 4 o'clock. My second question is geared towards Tim Prunty. And I would like to know if he was directed by Dr. Sprague to not release any of this information to Dave Bardo. And I also would like a formal request or formal reply to that by Thursday at 4 o'clock as well.
That one I can answer. Tim gave it to me in a timely fashion. I did not give it to Dr. Bardo.
Okay, can you answer that to me in an email, please, so I have a formal reply? Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And we will go on to new business. Item A is board member meetings and legislative report. And does anybody have anything they want to report on? And I will just report that I attended the regional meeting. Most of what was discussed there was bills that were before the legislature. That was about a month ago, so most all of those have moved on. I'm not going to go over those. I've also attended the legislative conference, and the legislative conference is virtual, and it's spread out over several Fridays here. And the first meeting was just talking about teacher hiring and teacher retainment. And I'll just give a couple of facts from there. This was in southeast Wisconsin. There was a speaker there who was from one of the universities saying that in southeast Wisconsin, they graduate about 2,062 people in the School of Education, but there's about 2,565 new openings every year, so we're about 20% behind every year. There are teachers getting certificates other ways. For example, at CISA 9, there's almost 40 people in the teacher certification program this year. One of the presenters was a teacher from Boston, and she is doing an Educator Rising Club at Boston, but she was just pointing out that when she surveyed her kids that are in that group and asked them how many of them had gotten negative comments about going into teaching from their teachers, all of them raised their hands, and when she asked how many had gotten negative comments from their families about going into teaching, almost all of them raised their hands. And so they did talk about other things that districts might do, salary incentives, creating a good culture for teachers where they're trusted and valued, paid internships. I know we just got rid of our, or disbanded our Educator Rising Club, but UW Stevens Point is giving a grant of $500 to school districts who want to start one of those. And this past Friday, the talk was on predicting what factors produce positive outcomes for a referendum. And there was just a few myths, and I know, JD, you probably believe some of these myths, but one myth would be I live in a Republican area. But their work has shown that if 80% of the community is Republican, you still have a 65% chance of passage. Another myth is that if fewer voters come out, you have a better chance of passing, and that's the opposite. Actually, the more people that vote, the more likely you are to pass. And referendums that are non-recurring and held as the previous one expires have a better chance of passing. And the three most important points that they stressed for informing the community would be: where is the money going, why is the project needed, and why is the project needed now? So that's all I have to report on those.
I saw that the governor vetoed Senate Bill 454, which was going to change the way at-risk readers are identified and tested in the state. And I guess I was sad about that, but I didn't know if they talked about that at all at the meeting. It was probably a month ago. You can't remember. He just did it a week ago or something. It sounded like people were for or against that. Curious.
That was WASB opposed that, and we didn't take a poll to see who was for or against. Anything else? We'll go on to item B is WCASS Wisconsin Council of Administrators of Special Services presentation.
Can you click share, or not share, but.
Try to stand out of the way, thank you. The reason it's
pass on there is because we did this presentation at, oh my God, yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
We did this presentation for the state Association for Special Education Leadership back in September, just to give them a look at our journey through the work that we've been doing to reach each and every student in our district. So a little grounding, so we all understand what educational equity does mean, that every student has access to the resources and educational rigor they need at the right moment in their education across race, gender, ethnicity, language, ability, sexual orientation, family background, and or family income. And that definition is from the Wisconsin DPI. Megan?
So I get to talk about data, because the school psych always talks about data. So when we started this, we did an audit to kind of dig into our numbers, looking at comparing our students to our students, and looking at our rates of, well, we really started looking at disability through different lenses. So overall, we did the audit on our 2018 numbers, and we had at that point a 17.4% rate throughout the district of students identified as having a disability. And so when we started to dig into those numbers, we started to see, if you're looking kind of at these numbers up here, when we look at students who are economically disadvantaged, they have a higher rate of being identified as a student with a disability. Or if we're looking at our English learners, they are also being identified as students with disabilities at a higher rate. So we are not seeing that what's called proportional representation across all of these different categories as we start to look, and that's what you would expect to see. So if we had, at the time we had 58.6% of our students were economically disadvantaged, we would expect to see within our students with disabilities population that same number of 58.6, but we were seeing 76.3%. So we started to say, we got a problem here. So when we started out, we thought we're looking at things through a special education lens, but as we start digging into some of these other areas, we see we have these same concerns outside of special education. We started looking at our gaps in achievement across this board, and our gaps in achievement, we really saw them in perspective for that first time. At least I did, as I was digging in. So we realized if we just looked at special education in itself, and we just looked at pupil services, just fixing little things like that would not be enough to help our students' achievement. So we started to talk with other areas of the school system.
So when we looked at this data, we had an opportunity at that time, and just to back up a little bit, when we look at what DPI looks at as what would be called disproportionality, they look at the rates of special education and over-identification, and if it gets over a threshold that they would deem disproportionate, you get identified, and then you get targeted for assistance. And this grant was coming out, and that was at that time not something we had to do, but because we didn't meet the threshold of numbers of students, so let's say you had to have a number of 30 students who were linguistically diverse. If we only had 21, then they're not going to look at us as disproportionate, even though we had over 35% of them identified in special education, which is well over what we would want to see. And so at that time, though, we took it upon ourselves to say, let's look at our data for all students. We knew our achievement was trending downward for each and every kid, not just students with special needs or students that are linguistically diverse. So we had the opportunity, and we shared this in the fall of 2020 with you too, so some of this is repeat, but we shared that data results that you just saw with you in March of 2019. We applied for the Research to Practice Inclusive Communities grant
through DPI. And while it's funded and supported through special education, it's not just a special ed initiative. The Director of Curriculum and Instruction and Pupil Services, we are working together very closely to support the learning of all students regardless. So just as a review, what is the RPIC grant? So over 5 years, we're in year 3 right now. It builds on the PLC, which is the Professional Learning Communities framework, which you guys put a lot of money into about 4 or 5 years ago. And we're building upon that, and that was a key structure of this grant, was having those solid frameworks. Implements a framework for learning at the core. So team planning structures for each and every student in the classroom, which we call C3 teams. Teaching and learning strategies for students in our classrooms. Sustainable coaching systems and bidirectional communication for any innovation to be implemented and sustained. And so the innovation that we are implementing through this is the inclusive communities innovation. But we're hoping to build our systems, and you've heard that when we've talked about our SIP, our communication systems, our coaching systems, in order to be able to sustain the work that we're trying to do. So year 1, which was 1920, and the end of that was a pandemic, as you know, so that hindered but didn't stop our work. We had a commitment between Pupil Services and Curriculum to do the work as one. We established an internal coach to lead the grant initiatives and deliverables, which was April Schofield at the time, and now we have Carlene Kemp, and Chris Robinson is also supporting our middle school principal, and they have jumped in this year and are doing a fabulous job. The district leadership team was established, and we're the first to engage in ICS, Integrated Comprehensive Systems for Equity and Professional Learning through PLC. So we did ICS 1, we did Leading PLC through ASA, and we did Leading by Convening, which is how we collaborate with our external partners and family engagement as well, and learning those skills. Year 2, 2021, we developed the school leadership teams, which was our SLTs. And what we were really excited about that was it was no longer a top-down where you had department chairs, but rather we have 30 staff members from all levels who are on these teams at each school. And then they went through ICS 1 and did the training. We also solidified our mission, vision, and collective commitments. All teaching and instructional assistants completed 6 modules. I would say more like 5 modules because mostly the DLT and the SLT did the equity audit together, and that is module 6. So that was year 2. Is that you? Okay.
And we're back to the data. So when we did this in the end of last school year, we started to see some of our numbers were trending down to more expected levels. We are still not where we would anticipate being. However, just by starting some of these conversations, none of the work, none of the PLC structures have been changed at this point. We're just starting to think differently about how to support our students, and we started to see some of these numbers changing just ever so slightly, which is encouraging to me. And we used a lot of this in developing our SIP goals. All right, so when we started to look at this from our different lenses, like I said, we continued to have some over-identification, but we were seeing that starting to come down little by little. But we also were seeing a lack of access to general education for different groups. So they were being pulled out of instruction and not allowed to have access at the rate of their peers. So we were seeing that. In general, we were seeing disproportionalities still across groups when we looked at our academic achievements. We mainly saw this, or our biggest concerns were our ELA scores for our males across all of our standardized testing. We saw they were not performing at the same rates as their female peers. We saw huge disproportionality in achievement of our English learners, our students with disabilities, students on free and reduced lunch, and students of color. So we were seeing some pretty large gaps still across all of that.
Hi there, good evening. All right, so can I have the clicker? Thanks. I think I'm rounding the bend and heading out with the presentation here. So looking at all this data was something we hadn't really done collectively as an admin team, let alone with our teachers on board as well. So last summer, a few short months ago, we did that as a DLT. The district leadership team first did it together, diving into some of the data, and you'll see some of our problem statements we came up with. After that process, we used some district capacity assessment and PLC fidelity rubric data. So both of these elements, the district capacity assessment judges our system to see how equipped we are to take on these new initiatives, and are we making progress in the work. So when we talk about a communication plan, do we have the elements that we deem necessary and are researched and appropriate for a communication plan to be effective? Do we have the right people in place to help support whatever work we're trying to do? Remember, this is a process not just for this one thing, but to help our school grow no matter what the next thing might be that we need to help all of our students to learn and grow. And that means a lot of support not only for our teachers, but our leaders too, because we need to model what we want our teachers and our teams to go through and work through. So in our continuous improvement plan, you've seen our goals on that before. So we have our academic goal, our school conditions goal, and then our leadership goal. But in each of those, there's embedded structures of what strategies and support do we need for our teachers, for our leaders, for our students. What data will we be monitoring? How will we do this, and what are our timelines? So it's very comprehensive and very thoughtful. So not only did our district team do that for our whole district, but then each school, those school leadership teams, did the same thing with their own data and made goals for their school. And they looked at some of the same data sources we did. And they also knew about these 3 problem statements that we had kind of identified in June as areas that we really needed to shine a heavier light on because they were increasingly concerning to us. So the first one is around our male students that Megan had shared before. They're achieving at disproportionately lower rates than their female counterparts on certain measures. That's not okay. We want to make sure that we have the tools in the toolbox that all of our students are achieving at the same level. Our second one are students who are English learners. They are scoring below basic on all outcomes in every subject. That means none of our English learners are scoring at proficient or even basic on any of those measures. So what are we doing or not doing that's preventing them from achieving? And then also where this had all kind of started was our students with disabilities are continuing to score below basic. Even though we're making some small growth like Megan had shared in our percentage being identified, we're still seeing that their scores we're not seeing the benefits yet because we haven't put really anything into place yet. We've just been doing some learning and we're really trying to be thoughtful of filling the gaps and the holes of the learning and the planning. So this year, we have not done these things yet. We're still working on these things, but we're starting to talk about how we might plan for our staff and students differently moving forward, making sure that we have our teacher teams feeling well equipped and prepared to plan ahead and not try to catch it afterwards, maybe when something was missed. So planning for all the students that are in front of you the first time. Research shows that the first instruction from a classroom teacher is your best bet for a student to obtain that knowledge. So when we talk about tiered systems of like RTI or systems to support, that's always a second thought. Like after the first round, research really shows that the first time around is a student's best bet. So we're continuing with the strategies. We're continuing to work on our teams and our PLC structure. So what that really means is teacher teams getting together. So 3rd grade having time to talk about what are we all teaching in 3rd grade, how are we assessing that? Oh, well, how did you teach that? Oh, you taught that this way. You scored a lot better. I'm going to use your strategy and hopefully improve some of our achievement and outcomes using each other's knowledge and professional knowledge because we are each other's best resources. And then we'd also like to work through solidifying some of our non-negotiables. We've worked with our SLT with that. and our school level teams this year so far. And those are some statements around how we might make decisions. So ensuring that we're keeping some of these things at the focus. So these are some of the strategies and supports that are in our continuous improvement plan that we did for this year. Our teams continue to, through our professional development, identify their essential standards. I had shared with you earlier that that document is now published on our website, and we're excited about that. We haven't had something like that before. Our teams are channeling support through Global PD, which is a solution tree or PLC resource that allows teachers to access different videos to help their teams improve even more in real time. We're doing a lot of professional development around strategies for students who we might not have all the tools yet, so we want to make sure that we're equipping our staff with tools, and we're doing a lot of learning around that, and we're still doing a lot of learning, so that's going to continue. We're continuing to work on our communication plan, and not only our communication plan internally, but also with external stakeholders as well. And then we're hoping to bring our non-negotiables to you at the end of the month in hopes that we can then start making some decisions through that lens as we move forward. So I just want to share with you a couple of things. This is a different way of thinking. I mean, historically, schools have kind of been a structure that's been pretty steeped in tradition. You know, you're kind of the teacher, you do your thing, you might not lean on a lot of other people or engage in a lot of other resources or other people even. But we're trying to think about things differently. And last spring when we asked the teachers, why do you do what you do? Why did you go into education? You can see that in the middle of that was really the kids. They want to inspire the kids, impact them, help them with their learning, help them with their find their passions in life, and help them in what they want to do in their future career, and really to make a difference in their lives. So last fall when we started some of this work about reflecting on maybe how things might have been in the past for schools and how we might have to plan a little bit differently and ahead of time for our students, some of our feedback you can see here. It might be challenging, it might be a hard road, but we can do it together. You know, through COVID, we've really heard a lot of our schools stepping up and getting together and really supporting one another, because it has been challenging for everybody in our community. And our teacher teams are no different. There's been a lot of things asked of our staff and our principal teams and our leaders in order to shift their thinking from online structures to teaching to having 10 of your kids in front of you and 15 of your kids at home. It's a lot of new things, so really being in it together. And then last spring, we asked again for some feedback. People feeling encouraged, they liked being involved. And we really asked for feedback a lot after every session. What help do you need? We wanted people to feel very supported through their learning. So we also asked a question around when we discuss equity, I feel, because it can be uncomfortable. And as we know, sometimes with discomfort comes a little bit of growth or a little bit of new learning. But you can see here from the results that over half of our staff felt engaged and excited. About 35 to 40% felt uncomfortable, but they were excited or still engaged and willing to learn. And then there were some who still weren't sure or maybe not sure how they felt, or less than 2% were uncomfortable with the work in general. So it's asking, I don't know if you've ever heard of the book like Who Moved My Cheese, but it is a lot of cheese moving, because never before have teachers worked with another professional, maybe a special education professional, to plan ahead of time instead of after knowing that a student didn't get that information the first time around. It's a very different way of thinking. Speaking as a teacher, I was the lone planner, and if something didn't happen, then I kind of sought some input. This is kind of reversing that whole thinking process. All right, so this year, from August, we've really been intentional, bless you, about making sure that we're hearing from them. If we need to pause and do some reteaching, we're perfectly good with going back and reviewing strategies, reviewing any of the vocabulary that might be confusing, or even how we make some of these things work within a school system, which can be a barrier too. So just know that the whole goal of this is not only to improve right now, but to improve our school system as a whole. So as we continue to grow, we can sustain any sort of newly implemented strategy to help all of our students at any time. And we're really hoping that we'll see some of these benefits when we start to engage in the structures. Again, so far it's been learning, and it's been a lot of reflection and feedback from our staff. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Amy, I just have to ask, when you were talking about males scoring lower than their female counterparts, what have you done to identify why that is, and what do you think you'll do to overcome that? If you can answer that in a minute or two.
So we haven't really gotten to the root yet of why that is. So we're still really kind of wrapped up. If I'm a general education teacher, we're pretty wrapped up still in identifying those essential standards and making assessments that align to our standards. So we haven't yet done like an assessment audit per se to say if we would have questions that might favor one way or the other. We haven't engaged the students yet in hearing from them. But what we would do then is, now that we know this, there are strategies and there's research to say what strategies might work better with different populations of students or might help not only those students but to engage all students in the classroom. So we're not quite to that point yet. That's a good question though.
Okay. Anything else before we move on?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Heidi. The school board received a letter this past week, and oh, I'll try Danny's. Testing. Okay, thank you. The school board received a letter this past week, and it talked about good practices that we're doing, and you know, being someone who's been out of the education business for about 10 years, I was hoping you could explain to the board what those 3 good practices were, because I have a feeling we all don't know. So, social emotional learning.
Can you familiarize me with the letter that you received, or you're just?
Well, Dr. Sprague said that these were 3 examples of good practices in education today.
Oh, yeah.
And that they are implemented in our district.
Yes.
So all I'm asking
Yeah.
is for an explanation of social emotional learning.
So social emotional learning would be learning that supports the, could be character, could be the social, any learning that kids are going to be doing together, how we get along in a classroom, how we use our manners. Social emotional learning could be supporting a student's emotional growth, their social growth, and using strategies and curriculum that will support that and support that in order to learn. And if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, what needs to be done before we can get to a higher achievement, right? And part of it is you need to have clothes, and you need to have food, and you need to have sense of belonging. And so, and you have to have emotional support. So we know that in educational settings that we need to provide that in order to help kids learn.
Heidi, who was the guy from Wausau when you did that?
Oh.
The teachers were doing that. Was it
Dr. Hartwig.
Yes, are we still doing that? Or
We still do.
That for a minute?
Yeah, so we have the BEST, which is a screener for externalizing factors that kids might exhibit or internalizing factors that kids might exhibit. And we do that twice a year. And teachers are the ones who take a look at their classes, they get to know their kids, and then they rate them on these factors. And we actually have CISA 9 support this year to help us utilize that data a little better in our support system so that we can make good decisions, not only about individual kids, but about our health of our system and our classrooms and using interventions that will help support that. So yeah, we still do.
Culturally responsive teaching.
I would say that it could be called lots of different things. Culturally responsive is that we know the students in our classrooms, and we understand and respect where their backgrounds are, whether that be their race, their gender identity, their religion, whatever it is that they're coming to us, that we have an understanding and that we own and we know our own identities so that we can support them, whether that be them seeing themselves in their curriculum and the books that we're reading, and we're honoring where they're coming from regardless of their background. So we want to be responsive to that.
The final one was restorative practices.
That one I'm really excited about because we are just starting to do a lot more learning about restorative practices. We know that punishment in and of itself doesn't help change behavior, and we also know that we want consequences to actually be aligned to what the kid or whoever it might be so that they can learn from it. Restorative practices actually brings in the ability for people to work things out and make them be accountable to each other. And we use circles sometimes with adults too and talk to them and get to the root of what's going on so that we can move forward with better learning. And so we are excited about being able to use restorative practices in the district moving forward.
What was the year that we started not, well, okay, I'll start over. The grant is called Creative Inclusive Communities. So when I hear the word inclusive, what I think of is within our school system is that we have basically all our students, whether they're special ed or non-special ed, in the same classes. When did we start that?
Those are two very different conceptions. So just to be clear, inclusive communities means that no matter who comes into our classrooms, that we are planning and preparing for them, and that they are included in the learning. It does not mean anything about what their specialized services might look like. It could be that students still receive services outside the classroom. Our goal is that we try our best to reach them the first time around, and that we have good practices that are going to meet their needs. And when I say there, I even feel icky because each and every kid is an individual, and so I don't like to lump those kids or kids with special needs into, because they're diverse and their needs are diverse. And so we, regardless, are going to meet the needs of kids that have severe disabilities, whether that be cognitive or intellectual, behavioral, but it's not, those are very two different things that we're talking about. We're talking about special ed law, how continuum of services, all of that. And then we're talking about inclusive communities where everybody has a sense of belonging and has high expectations for their learning.
Well, I'm going to bring on some data that was provided to me last evening in a group of 200 people. We now know what our scores were as a district for the past testing period for the state test. In English this year, we have 19.8% proficient, 2.6 advanced. Now, proficient means you're at grade level. Unfortunately, the other way to look at it is 77.6% of our students aren't at grade level. In math, we have 18.1 proficient, 1.8 advanced. That totals 19.9%, so that tells us that 80.1% of our students are not at grade level. So then I look back at the data, and we basically started this grant and started looking at things differently. And I understand that there were people who thought this was important. In 2018, the year the decision was made to start this, in our district, 35.4% were at proficient or advanced, 35.4 in English. We've dropped 13 points since 2018. In math, in 2018, we were 31.4% of our people our kids were proficient or advanced in math, and that's dropped 11.5%.
Can I ask?
So,
I can address that too.
well, and I'm just
curious.
concerned, as a grandfather of a sixth grader who's here, and almost 2-year-old who will be coming.
Go ahead, Julie.
Having been there last night as well, the most recent data is from 18-19 because the 2021 data hasn't been released yet. It isn't good, trust me, when it's released in a couple weeks.
So are you saying the data that was given last night was from last year? We didn't test last year.
Correct, it's from 18-19. Now,
So so what you're telling me, just so I'm clear, because I'm 70. So you're saying that the 19.9 in math was from 3 years ago?
well, and I don't have it in front of me, Dave, but what I do know is that like the forward exam, that's taken in grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10. Does 10 still take it, or is it, thank you? ACT
Social studies.
Aspire. Okay, social studies. Anyway, so that was embargoed until recently. At the next meeting, you will get Antigo's results on not only the forward exam, but on the district report card. We couldn't bring that data tonight. It isn't released yet and won't be until the 16th.
So what, so the data that was presented,
I believe he took...
on this that he had on his screen, it says 2021.
Yeah, so unless he, and I didn't study that, unless he got his hands on that embargoed data, which I don't know how that would have happened, but we can compare it next
Okay,
meeting.
no problem. I'm sorry I brought it up.
But
We'll
what
wait.
he could have done too was taken the state's results for the forward. You're probably reading about those in the news. Wisconsin in general has gone down. He did mention that. And we're no exception. Some of it, of course, is the pandemic, but before the pandemic, we had great cause for concern. So we can take a look next meeting.
Okay.
And see what those numbers are.
I'll be quiet now.
Did you,
No,
so you don't want me to?
I
Because
think
the data's
we're
not correct?
Okay, Dave, unless you have something else you want to ask
Nope,
Katie?
we're good.
Okay.
Dave, I was just curious, because I think the students in special education have been in with the general classroom for 20, 30 years, right? Is that the point you were making? Partly when you asked
No,
for
the point I was making is that there was a discussion that I brought about at an earlier meeting that a lot of people weren't able to be at because it was an executive session, but I will repeat. I said in that executive session, when it was just the board, that back when I was a superintendent, there were kids, let's say ED, we don't even use that term anymore. However, there was a room for those ED kids. They had a safe spot. They had a teacher and an aide that worked with them. They went to shop classes, they went to Phi Ed. If they were good at math, they went to the math class. You know, algebra it was, but they had a problem. But they had a safe spot. Kids with learning disabilities, there might be a 10th grader in there that could only read at a 5 or 6th grade level. So for social studies, if it was U.S. history, they got a book that was at the 5th grade reading level. They weren't in the regular class, but they were getting the same material at a level they could understand. So that's where I was coming from.
Okay.
And like I said, you know, I've been out of it 10 years now.
So do we still have a room like that
It's based on individual needs. There's kids, we have spaces for kids that need space that can't be in the classroom due to whatever that might be on an individual basis, because that's what an IEP dictates, that it's individualized. And so it's not an all or nothing, as I explained before. We base it on their needs, but we do know that when we have students accessing, whether it's students with learning disabilities or emotional behavioral disorders or attention deficit, when they have the opportunity to access first-time content and then maybe they have support. But in the past, the reason that the gaps are so wide is that they were automatically pulled out. They were then taught by somebody who was not an expert in reading, and the gap widened. So that's why we look at every opportunity for kids to have first-time learning with experts, and how the C3 will eventually work. We know that not everybody can be an expert in everything. And so we want to gather people around kids that can be experts in a lot of different things and pre-plan for them so that we have less kids dropping out, less kids having to go to separate spaces. We're always going to have kids that are going to need more, always. But we just have a disproportionate amount that are not accessing it, and that's evident by our data.
Is there another subject on the agenda today where we're going to talk more about critical race theory, or was this?
It's not on the agenda.
I mean, but are we calling it reasonably related to this subject so we can talk about it, or no?
I'd say it's reasonably related if you want to talk about it.
I was just curious how he defined it last night. I just read the nice article in the paper. They put it on Facebook. I thought it was nice that I just thought we should talk about it since it's big news.
I can define it for you. In reality, unless you want it, I mean.
No, sure.
Well, I'm interested to see how they defined it.
Do you want to? Otherwise, you want me to try?
Go ahead.
Something along the lines of, were America's institutions built systemically racist? And I guess I personally never agreed with that. And so I don't know, maybe we should talk about this just for the sake of, personally, when I think about America's founding, you think about the Declaration of Independence, and you think of Thomas Jefferson saying, where is my... We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And typically that's how I think, that is our founding narrative. Now, and then we jump ahead a couple of years. When I was looking at this today, because I thought we were going to talk more about it, I just came across that Thomas Jefferson tried to criticize the slave trade in the Declaration of Independence, but part of the Continental Congress made him remove it. And then I got to thinking about the 3/5 clause and in the Constitution saying that the slaves will count as their population towards the House of Representatives. So the slave states, so the anti-slavery people, someone like James Wilson, instead of as opposed to James Madison, one of the other less famous constitutional founders, this is how John Madison quoted him. Wilson was one of the original supporters of the 3/5 Compromise, believing that compromise partially recognized the personhood of enslaved persons. This is during the Constitutional Convention. Yet on July 11th, Wilson, according to Madison's notes, did not well see on what principle the admission of blacks in proportion of 3/5 could be explained. Are they admitted as citizens? Then why are they not admitted on an equality with white citizens? Are they admitted as property? Then why is no other property admitted into the computation? Ultimately, despite his personal anti-slavery convictions, Wilson accepted the compromise as needed to create a stronger national union. So the interesting thing is, so this was the debate then, when they were framing the Constitution, if you were anti-slavery, like most of New England, do you want the slaves to count as 0/5? Don't count. Because now there's much less Southern representatives, and that led to too much Southern power in the early states, right? They had more representatives, so we had like 6 presidents in a row from Virginia because they had too much power. Slavery might have been stamped out much early, or if we could have avoided that compromise. But it's just an example of, these are hard subjects to talk about, right? Because I'm trying to be just objectively read the documents And so I don't want to teach our students that, hey, America was systemically racist, but some of the things you have to talk about somehow. And so I don't know if, I always thought it'd be super cool. We have on our website a list of standards, but that certainly is not a list of topics. And I've been begging for that for 7 years or 8 years, and maybe that would be something interesting, because it's hard to have these conversations. We have a divided country. And I know, I just wanted to throw that out there, that it's obviously just a difficult issue. And I didn't know if you guys wanted to talk some more about that, if the guy had any useful advice last night.
As a former social studies teacher, I understand exactly where you're coming from. And we could talk about the decisions to try to take away power from the southern states, and they reached a compromise because somehow they wanted to make 13 colonies become 13 states that would become one nation. And you're exactly right that the northern people didn't want to count the slaves, and the southern people wanted to count the slaves as 5/5. Now, in an educational sense, today, I would rather have our staff worrying about teaching the best that they can in math, social studies, science, English, and writing, and not worrying about if they say something that might upset a 5-year-old culturally. I would rather have them not be worried about that. And I understand you want to do what's best for every kid, and you do not want that child who is black to feel that they don't belong. We want them all to belong. But we also need to start getting better test scores.
I agree completely, and the research behind what the ladies here shared tonight says that's the best way to do it. Our number one academic goal, we knew we had to push it out farther because we didn't get in the situation we're in overnight. And certainly, as my letter will say when the report card is released, we had some momentum going, and COVID derailed that. That's not unique to Antigo. I don't know of any district who increased scores in the last 2 years. However, I agree with you completely that academic achievement is our primary focus, and I think the only thing we differ on is the best way to get there. And I believe the best way to get there is what you heard tonight. Focusing on academics alone without taking care of the children and growing that sense of belonging that you talked about, it won't work. It does go back to Maslow, actually. And so we're just prepared, again, to do the best job we can moving forward. The part I understand what you're saying, and I don't know that those conversations are happening in higher level history classes, JD, but I definitely, and that's why I put that in my letter to the board, I definitely don't agree that something like restorative practices, which, yeah, is a term, if you have 2 kindergartners fighting over the same ball at recess, you work it out with them. That's really what it is, and have them each be a part of that settlement, so to speak. So I don't believe that has anything to do with critical race theory, but I know last night's speaker disagrees with me. So that's why I just used those examples in my letter to the board.
And Heidi, I do appreciate you explaining those 3 to the group.
No problem. The question that I've been asked quite a few times and have myself is, why not use educational equality versus educational equity?
What did you say, quality?
Equality versus
Equality.
equity. Yeah.
Well, I would say that what we're talking about when we're talking about equity, we're talking about access. And we know that we don't have equity and access, even in just little old Anago, to the rigor that all students need. And so equity and access, I know people throw around like equal, fairness, you know, we're looking at it from the standpoint of having high expectations and high rigor of content for each and every kid when they need it. And that's what equity is, and not having it be anything that we did or perpetuated that removed that ability to have equity and access. Not everything is equal. What I need might not be what you need. That's the difference between equality and equity. And so that's how I look at it, and that's how it's defined differently in the educational realm. We're not looking, we know that, I know there's people that think or whatever that we're looking at everybody's going to come out lockstep the same, or, you know, equity and outcomes. And that's what we're saying, is that we don't want to be the reason that people are being chosen predeterminately winners or losers. We want all kids to be winners. Do we know that sometimes kids are going to struggle and they might not, but we don't want it to be because of us or anything that we're doing that's preventing them from either accessing or achieving. And so we're always going to reflect on that as a system and as teachers to see what can we do better. Are some kids still going to fail? Unfortunately, yes, they are. But we're going to do each and every day, come back and try something different. That's our job.
I appreciate that feedback. I still don't understand it, and it confuses me. I think you explained it well, but it still doesn't make sense. You know, like, why would our access be different if we're looking through a equality lens versus an equity lens? And maybe that's just a follow-up conversation too.
Sure.
I know that has been a big question from a lot of people in general. And I don't know if it specifically relates to this discussion or JD's topic discussion or whatever, but I just thought I would share that question because it's pretty commonly asked.
Yeah, I think in today's, that it's become this word that somehow is not good. I really don't care what we call it, honestly. I just want to have each and every kid have access to high quality instruction, and that we come at it every day trying something to make sure that we give them the best shot at it, regardless of whatever group they're in.
I know that didn't have a lot of academic terms in it, but I agree with you. I think that's exactly right.
Was I supposed to have more academic terms than that?
I'm just saying,
what would
it's
have,
layman's terms, and I think that resonates.
Okay.
I don't know how to do that. I'd have to look both of those words up in the dictionary, Jill, and compare them myself and think about it for a while. Would you say equity versus equality? Right. It'd be cool if we had equality of outcomes, if everybody got, what we said, proficient. If everyone was advanced and it was actually earned, then we would have equality of outcomes, and that would be good in this context.
Like, yeah, I mean, it's equal access to resources and learning to have the best outcomes. Now, outcomes are going to vary because we're all individuals, right? So either way, the outcomes are going to be different because we're all individualized. But the equal access and support.
I think in that terms, it's the same. I think the way that you just said it, equity and access, equal access, is the same. I think what's happened is those terms have become, like we're fighting over terms. If we can just agree that we don't want barriers to be existing for any child, and that we acknowledge that there's some barriers that we put in place that we need to get rid of for any particular child. I think, Dave, we can have both. We can have a kid who's 5, who might be different, who might be of a different color, and be held to high standards and be his identity being honored in that classroom. I think we can do both, and I think that's our job to do both.
You do say some of the districts that have taken this further have eliminated their district or their gifted and talented classes. So I would say we probably, somebody correct me, we eliminated.
I'm gonna correct you just in terms of why gifted and talented classes have shown no outcomes when you talk about gifted and talented separated, and even children in gifted and talented separated programs don't feel that those work. What they're doing is they're trying to excel all students, giving all kids. It doesn't mean that kids won't have access to AP, kids won't have access to dual credit, kids won't have access to those higher levels of learning, but it's choice, and it's not something, like right now, we have an access issue where we have 60% of our kids in poverty accessing, in general, let's say 60% poverty, proportionally. We only have 11% of our kids potentially accessing AP courses. Why is that? What is it about that they're a child of poverty that they can't access high levels of learning? But when they do access it, they achieve at the same or higher levels. So that's what we're talking about, is why. Like, go back and say why. What can we do differently to encourage kids before they get to high school, no matter where their background is, that they can achieve at high levels?
Okay, so
Not
but
to
in eighth
confuse
grade,
it like with the calculus class.
Yes,
maybe
like calculus.
Those level
Yes.
courses will always be.
Yes, but it's gonna be, they're chosen, right? Like, they're not socially promoted placement classes. We see that too.
right, but to get to the calculus, you gotta take algebra in eighth grade.
Absolutely.
Yep. I just want to share too, not to nitpick, this came up earlier today too, that language matters. So I do think it is important to understand the words we're using and the definitions. So I don't think it's, it's not a fight over equity versus equality, but it's certainly important to ensure that we're really transparent in what that means for our district, because, we're using a different word that is confusing for many to understand. What does this mean, and why aren't we using equality? And so that right there may heighten people's concern and response. And so language matters, and I always stand by that. So
Right, it kind of lumps in with, well, when you try to define socialism as, I don't know, some government ownership of industry, and communism as government ownership of all industry, and then you're saying, I'm going to provide everyone with an equal outcome regardless of their effort level, I don't know, with some sort of universal basic income, and that's, so then we get to those words, equity, equality, and they're lumped in with those political systems, and I don't know, I certainly don't want to be a communist. And I assume most of the parents in Andy aren't wanting us to, promote communism.
Okay, unless there's more, we're gonna move on. Okay, we'll go on to item C, the mental health grant presentation.
Oh, you have me again, sorry. But I'm gonna let Bree do most of, I'm gonna let Bree do most of the talking. So, do you have it, Dustin, or do I need to do something?
There it is.
Okay, awesome. Okay, I'll just do the clicker. Sorry, go ahead. Here, you start. Okay, so we just wanted to give you an update of our mental health grant. I'm not sure when I know that you, I made you aware that we were applying for it, and then we received it and got notice in August, late August, and so we had to do some shifting. Bree was a school counselor at the high school. Now she is our mental health navigator for our school district, and we hired a new counselor, and that'll become clear kind of what her role is within the grant. So we received $150,000 over 2 years. So we have $75,000 this year. And this will kind of just give an update of what that all entails and what we're going to be working on. We did align when we wrote the grant to our vision and mission and our collective commitments, and these are just a couple where it's specifically tied to, I don't know if you saw that, providing a safe and supportive environment for all of our students and staff, no matter what socioeconomic status, race, religion, gender, or sexual identity they may be. And we will take time to build relationships with students and staff members. Am I doing this too? So our SIP specifically, our continuous improvement plan, goal 2, school climate and culture. To increase trust amongst all stakeholders, by August 2024, we will build and implement a framework to transform our school community as measured yearly by our EE survey. That's the Staff Educator Effectiveness Survey. Vibrant School Survey, which is part of the grant, which will be given to staff, students, and families. School Level Trust Indicator Survey, which is the YRBS data that is given 6/12. We also just gave a survey to our elementary students and our middle school students. We've never really asked them whether they feel like they belong in their schools, and so we made a really basic survey for them to take that our school counselors have been helping them fill out, and we're getting some good data about that because we want to pinpoint, and you'll see some of our data where kids start to feel like they don't belong and don't have the services that they feel they need for their mental health in our district. Learning Target 2 is can collaborate with peers to build our consistent implementation process, and then action steps facilitate continued staff learning through pupil services on restorative practices, trauma-sensitive skills, and the mental health pathway. Okay, so why the mental health grant? I did attach this in there. Dustin, can you click on this? Is that live? If it's not, that's okay. You did have, don't worry about it, because you guys should have access. I know I got some requests for access to it. But this just gives all the data that we used and collected over the last year, to determine where we wanted to focus our grant. A huge piece of it was our YRBS survey that the students took, and we had a decline, significant decline over the last 3 cycles, 2013, 16, and 19 in their student sense of belonging. And then the other area was students feeling they have access to the mental health supports when they need it. Those are the 2 areas that we focused on, but we had a lot of data from social services in there. And we have online third-party professionals, counselors that come in, therapists from different entities and serve our students right in our schools. And so we had data from them as well, our referrals. And one exciting piece to that is that we're almost finished completing a MOU with Compass Counseling to provide, we'll basically have a therapist in our schools every day, and we'll be able to see elementary students too. So I'm really excited about that. I think that's it, but if you have questions about the data, let me know.
Okay, so you guys can ask me questions at any point throughout this. Thank you. But Heidi is actually giving you a hard copy of this DPI mental health quick fact sheet. I like to make things really pretty and visually appealing, but I also want you to just have like the nitty-gritty details of it. So it really breaks down what is our mental health grant. What is that $150,000 going to be going towards in the next 2 years? And I just think that it's really important. I'm going to use it as a cheat sheet too. That you know that, like mental health stigma reduction programs, training our staff in youth mental health first aid, and working with students who are in crisis. So as you can see on this quick fact sheet, the first goal is that by June of 2023, the number of students in grades 6 through 12 who report that they don't receive the mental health supports that they need will decrease from 51% to 46%. So we'll see a 5% decrease at the high school, and then a 5% decrease at the middle school as well. It also details some of the action steps that we're going to be taking to ensure that we reach that goal. So formation of the mental health team. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. It's a school-based mental health team, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Completion of the mental health academy, which is happening during the 21-22 school year. The mental health pathway, having that completed by May of 2022. I did print this for you, but it's like 50 pages long, so I'm also going to email it to you because I think I might get in trouble for printing 15 copies of that in color. I know, sorry. And then we want to train at least 40% of our staff in youth mental health first aid. So youth mental health first aid is very similar to ALICE, where there is like a sequence of steps for adults to utilize with youth who are in a mental health crisis or a medical crisis.
We currently have 3 trainers in the district, and our goal is to train 40% of our staff by the end of this school year. We currently have about 5% trained. So it's a feat, but it's an important task. The next goal is increasing students' sense of belonging. So by June of 2023, the students' sense of belonging at Anago High School and Anago Middle School will increase from 57% to 63% at the high school and 58% to 64% at the middle school. As reported by that youth risk behavior survey that Heidi mentioned before, all of our students grades 6 through 12 took that on October 26th this year. The action steps that we're going to take to ensure that goal is met is consistent district-wide implementation of trauma-sensitive schools. I just kind of want to explain what trauma-sensitive schools is in case you weren't aware. Trauma-sensitive schools is just really having a lens that some or all of our students may have experienced trauma. Even if they haven't experienced trauma, what's a way that we could respond to them as if they have maybe experienced some trauma and just kind of approach things in a nicer way. So I gave the example today. If my kindergartner was late to class, she could cry at the drop of a dime, I tell you. She's pretty sensitive. But if she was late to class and the teacher said, "Where have you been all morning? Why weren't you here on time?" She would probably shut down and really struggle to participate or learn anything in class for a little while. Or another response that I've heard one of our high school teachers say is, "Hey, come on in. Thanks for joining us today. I'm glad you made it." It's just an approach that we can take to be a little bit more sensitive to some of our students who either have trauma or don't have trauma.
They might revisit that and talk to them at a better time when they're not late and running and stressed, and still talk about, okay, how are we going to get to class on time?
Yeah.
So it's not about.
A lot of times we hear that trauma sensitive means no consequences, and that's not the case. It's just a way of speaking to students and staff members in a little bit more of a respectful or open tone. The next thing that we will do to reach that student sense of belonging goal is we are going to conduct a social emotional learning curriculum at the elementary school. We currently utilize Second Step, which is our counselor, school counselor curriculum. So in previous years, the school counselors would go into the classrooms and deliver all of that curriculum. At the high school, we utilize 7 mindsets for our social emotional learning curriculum. And I say in previous years, counselors would drive that curriculum. At this point, we've moved to teacher implementation with counselor kind of backup or boost on some of the lessons. And at the high school, we utilize an advisory curriculum where all of our students are getting the same curriculum.
Do you remember the 7 mindsets off the top of your head?
I would not do very well at that. Live to give, passion first, we are connected. Oh, I only did 3 of them. I couldn't even remember mine. Every time we have an advisory meeting, we always go to ours. I think mine's like take risks or something, because I said in this position I'm taking risks all the time and trying something new. The last action step that we have is the train the trainer and team staff training on restorative practices with our 4th through 12th grade staff, and then capacity building at the kindergarten through 3rd grade level. So we are really starting a pilot group with that restorative practices with grades 4 through 12, but our elementary staff, a lot of what they do in their day-to-day is a restorative practice. Like Julie mentioned earlier, if there's kindergarten students who have a problem on the playground, well, their teachers are finding a restorative answer to that problem without, additional training on training or pilot groups. And then at the bottom, Heidi mentioned it earlier, but it's just how it connects to our continuous improvement plan. Okay, the next thing, Dustin, you probably don't have access to that. Maybe. Nice. Okay, so this is something that the Pupil Services Department has worked very hard on. Me being in a new position this year, we really wanted to define what are a school counselor's primary roles, what is a school social worker's primary roles, that is grayed out for now until we fill that school social work position, what is a school psychologist psychologist do, and what does the school mental health navigator? What are their roles? And if you scroll down, Dustin, you will also see what are their primary responsibilities. If we have a student who's in a mental health crisis, whose primary responsibility is it to screen that student or work with that student? And then, of course, there's shared responsibilities. And then there is just a detailed list at the bottom. Who are our counseling staff? Who are our school psychologist staff, mental health navigator, and then director of pupil services. So we worked really collaboratively to decide whose duty would this be and at what time. How can we make sure that we're encompassing it all, but not double doing or doing the same job for 6 different times when that might not be necessary. Okay, and then we have a lot, we wear a lot of hats. We do a lot of stuff in the pupil services department. But this is just a list of some of those things. Now, you will see that not every one of our school counselors is listed on here, and I'm not going to tell you that means that they are having their feet up in their office all day. They're, you know, working on universal things. But there is, like Megan Murphy works on our equitable multi-level systems of supports, special education systems, etc., all the way down to our PBIS leads of Anita Maddock and Diane Johnson, life tools, an after-school program for our students who need that little boost of functioning from a day-to-day, crisis planning, etc. So that's just some examples of things that the pupil services team is the lead on. And then this is where I was going to talk about that mental health team. So we are starting a school-based mental health team. What does the mental health need look like in our district? And I was talking to someone earlier today. I really want a sample of elementary, middle, high school. Instructional assistants, administrators, teachers, elective teachers, core teachers, community members. Because every single one of them is going to come to that meeting with a different perspective on what the need is, how we can improve our mental health supports, and how we can ensure that our students are feeling like they're supported in a mental health framework at school. The next kind of committee that we are working on is that social emotional learning curriculum review, and then that screener. So as JD asked earlier, best with Dr. Hartwig, we do screen our students in the fall and in the spring. And I met with CISA for a very, very long time today and really looked at what is the health of an overall classroom, what are some interventions that could meet the most needs for all of those students. And then now I am setting up meetings to go and talk to each one of those teachers and say, this is what the health of your classroom looks like. Here are some interventions you could try. Which one do you want to give a shot? And then we'll come back together in a couple weeks or in a month and see, did you see any progress from that? And then it gives individual responses as well. But we want to make sure, is that the best screener that we could be giving our students? Is there a different social emotional screener that we could be giving that would yield better results or more employable results, you know, that we could better utilize? So those are things that we're looking at as well. And then I have done a lot on Canva. Canva is like the best. It makes like the prettiest things that you would think a graphic designer designs. That isn't true because it's a free program online. So I have created mental health resources for families, mental health resources for staff members, community resources for staff members. And if you go, I have shared this shared drive with all of you. If you go into your drive and on the left-hand side, click shared drive, mental health information and resources right here is where you will find all of these things housed. So, for example, this navigating a mental health crisis, I've made one for staff members. If you have a student who's experiencing a mental health crisis in school, what are some things that you could say to them? What are some questions you could ask them? What are some warning signs that they might be going through a mental health crisis? And on the flip side, I've actually made one for families as well. If you're at home and your student or a friend or a neighbor is experiencing a mental health crisis, how can you help them in that instance? The community resources, As part of the grant as well, we're looking at resource mapping. What resources do we have in the district? What resources do we have in the community? What gaps are we finding? What's in the community that could be in our schools or vice versa? And so that's just a list of potential resources all the way from clothing to electricity, to transportation, just kind of a list for our families. And then there is a crisis number contact. We utilize a crisis worker that works out of Langlade, Lincoln, Marathon County? Covers
Lincoln and Langley.
Okay, thank you. But he covers 2 different counties. So sometimes he's not always available. So there's a text line on there, there's a national hotline on there, there's a WASA hotline on there, just so that people have these resources available to them. So that's kind of where I've gone with some of those resources for families and resources for our staff members, just to kind of scratch the surface of some of our needs. That's my last slide. Do you have any questions?
What were some of the other screeners they talked about? Like, I remember ACE being popular several years ago. They had all that trauma. You're physiologically more difficult to learn.
That's not really, you're talking about the ACEs?
Yeah.
It's not really a screener. It screens for your ACE number. So like they still use that, like, but this screener's a little bit different than that.
I'm a little selfish, but I'm a co-facilitator for a school-based mental health navigators network in Wisconsin. And at our next meeting, which is next week, I put on the agenda to talk about all the different SEL screeners. So Sabres, Best, I mean, there's a laundry list of them, but I really want to get, what do you utilize it for? What are your pros, cons? How hard is it to implement? All of those things. So there's a lot more to choose from, but I'm a little selfish. I put that on the agenda for next time because I wanted to talk about it. So there's a lot of different options, and we're going to look at those as a team to determine. For the curriculum review, I've actually already sent out a survey to our elementary staff that answers some of the 4 critical questions in reviewing that curriculum. Does it meet your students' needs? Do you feel like it meets your classroom's needs as a whole? So trying to kind of creatively review that curriculum as well.
Looking at trauma-sensitive schools and the lens of responding as though the individual's had or has experienced trauma, do we, and maybe just ask this, but I'm asking for a more direct response, like do within all the screening and surveys and things, do we gather ACE scores of our student population to identify students with high trauma experiences through the ACE, which is less than 10? So we
haven't done it on our students or collected that, and usually it's because that's a pretty private thing that families would do. It's not something that that generally you would ask. That's been my from Counsel. That's where we get a lot of our work in DPI. So ACEs isn't just something you just go out and say, hey, did you have an abusive father or something? You know, like there's a specific, and so we have never implemented it, and that's why. But as far as I'm not sure if our county uses it. I don't. With families, I have no idea.
Yeah, and I'm familiar with the ACE scores, and some feedback on some of the questions within surveys is pretty, and some intensive questions, personal questions maybe, so that's why I didn't know if, looking at a trauma-sensitive lens, how we're gathering that feedback to identify the trauma experiences. Obviously, I'm very passionate about the mental health concerns. I've expressed that pretty consistently and monthly. So I was just curious on that. And my other question is, it ties to a sense of belonging. I would hypothesize that achievement gaps would likely correlate to a reduced sense of belonging. So just interested in feedback on where individual student achievement or achievement gaps correlate or relate to their sense of belonging.
It's really interesting that you bring it up. I don't know if I brought this up at the last meeting or not, but there was just a research study done in Madison with Madison Middle School math teachers. And what they did was they looked at teacher efficacy and capacity in teaching math. and then the perceived sense of belonging of the students. And so it was, what they found is they're correlated, that whether it's the teacher having a high sense of, I know how to do math and I'm teaching math and the students love being in my math class and they're learning math, they tend to have a higher sense of belonging in that classroom. So I think if that's what you're talking about, it's definitely an area that needs to be explored more because they're finding that.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I guess I'm looking at not just the staff members' individual competence level and then how a sense of belonging is reflected there, but students that have achievement gaps, you know, like our data results and we look at students' scores and then do those scores potentially correlate to a reduced sense of belonging.
Yeah, in our YRBS data from 2019, we did find that the A students felt they belonged, B students felt less, C students felt, and D and F students had no sense of belonging in our school. So it does correlate.
Thank you. Was that in here and I missed it?
No, that was in a presentation from 2019.
Got it.
But we're just, like I said, or what Bree said, is that we just finished up the YRBS this last couple of weeks.
And that is why we have that school conditions goal in our continuous improvement plan, just what you're saying, the two are correlated.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think they're causal? I mean, if you are really good at school, you have good grades, so you really feel like you belong.
I'm sure it isn't a perfect correlation because there are always outliers, of course, but I think in general, yeah. And for some, it might be athletics or the arts, or and that's what, you know, that connection is that drives that sense of belonging rather than an academic grade, but
And
different variables.
anecdotally, I was at the high school last week and I was doing lunch duties and saw lots of girls going into the bathroom, so I wanted to go see what was up. And so I went in there and they were just congregated, you know, back around the corner, and I'm like, okay, it's time to get out. And there was a few that wouldn't move. There was two of them, and so I went over and started talking to them, and I said, why are you in the bathroom? And she's like, because I'm different. So she's doing her lunch in the bathroom. So we have these things that happen, and I know that we're trying to address things, and that's one student, but we got to have a chat, and yeah.
No, I'm very excited about this, and I'm excited to see the pathways and look at it a little bit more. It's a really concerning statistic to see 42% of high school students have seriously considered suicide in 2019, and that, you know, is noted in here, worth noting that was pre-pandemic. It's exciting to see this continue to move forward and other work that you're doing, Bree, and the district, because the mental health needs are there, and it's needed.
Going back to what JD said just briefly, our PBIS goal at the high school this year is to increase students who are participating in athletics and activities. So as a way to kind of increase that belonging, because it might be forensics club is why they feel like they belong at the high school. Or maybe it's they're an all-star wrestler, and that would really make them feel like they belong. So we're trying to really kind of go at it from different angles.
But to Jill's point too, it starts in the classrooms as well. Yeah. And that is a focus that we look at and talk about how can we establish that sense of belonging within our classes. Because teachers, I mean, they're trying their very best to build relationships with these kids, and it's a struggle. I mean, we have a lot of kids with a lot of struggles. Yeah. So.
Okay, thank you. Unless somebody has something else. We will move on to item D, legal counsel representation.
So we attached a letter here, and thank you, Jill, for pointing out. I didn't have the date, so I emailed the original to all of you, which was October 3rd. As he's done before, Dean Dietrich has moved or joined a different group. For my own understanding, I had to revisit the policy, so I brought it. It's very short. It's policy 0172. So the board may employ or retain an attorney or attorneys to represent us in actions brought for or against the district. You know, and we've had different attorneys for different purposes. Of course, Mattoon is one example. But Dean has been with the district longer than I have. Jill had another question which I wanted to answer for everyone tonight. It does depend too on really what the question is. For example, Boardman Clark attorneys are the ones, specifically Mike Julka and Brian Goodman, that join us at our CISA 9 superintendent meetings. And so that's free, you know, and a lot of the COVID information that I brought back to share with the board comes from them. And of course, we use Barry Forbes from WASB, he's free as well. So it depends on the question and what we need to look at. But it would be my recommendation, because he already has them, I missed the deadline, which is not a deal breaker, by the way, but Dean has taken our files with him. And so for local access, I would continue to consult with Dean. Any questions for me on that?
Do you want a motion?
We actually don't need one, Dave.
Okay.
So, but thank you.
I just for FYI, when you have to do your continuing legal education every 2 years, you have to take 20 or 18 credits, and 3 of them have to be ethics. He's almost always the lecturer. He does like the best ethics attorney in the state, or one of them, you know, for doing all the continuing legal education. So he's well respected.
Okay. We'll go on to item E then, support staff substitute wage increase discussion.
I provided you just a survey of various districts and their support staff sub wages. Right now, we're not really competitive to the other districts. They're just asking for an increase on that.
And that is Melanie Ryan from HR, for those who don't know, has recently joined our ranks at these meetings. Thank you, Melanie.
So I guess how competitive are we in Antigo? You know, I don't know how you would compare some of these jobs, like special ed sub. There's not nothing else in Antigo to compare to.
Yeah, as a substitute, you know, you have to kind of find the right person, like that, because it is really on a day-to-day basis, so you're not going to work every day.
But I think of like custodial, for example, or nutritional services. How competitive are we to other businesses in the Antigo areas? Have you looked at that or not?
I think, Tim, didn't we talk to some local businesses, but I don't think I got like a custodial rate. I think I got one last year, but that's for like a full-time position as opposed to a sub.
Okay.
But I could look at that.
Andy, I think the long and the short of it is we have not, like most businesses, they're responding quicker to shortages than we are. And I don't think we're staying competitive with our, I think there are people that like school year jobs, and that's a very particular type of person that works very well with families. When we get into the 12-month positions, our support staff wages are starting to lag behind. And this is an example of where we're just trying to address one very specific class of substitutes. In the long run, we're going to have to look at our wage scale across the board with support staff because we are not competitive.
Okay. Any other questions for Melanie or Kim on this?
Is there a reason why nutrition services is $2 less?
because the base wage, is, I guess,
Too
lower.
close to $12.
Yeah.
Okay, that explains it. Okay, no problem. Do you want a recommendation? Do you want a motion? Or is that next time?
Correct, next time.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
He's wanting to give a motion.
I want to give dollars away, can't you
Dave,
tell?
you're gonna get your chance for a motion a little later. Okay, so you'll bring
But
that
Andy, I
back.
might not do it at the appropriate time.
You'll bring that back at the next meeting, and we'll go on to item F, year-to-date summary report discussion.
You know, Andy, after you asked me what this report was all about, I realized I must have totally missed the mark. So what I'm trying to do here is to give you a simplified version of I'm going to call it a profit and loss statement by month. That's the whole idea. And then I start doing my little Excel stuff, and I get too many columns and probably too much information. And I have enough work to do, so if this isn't of any value, but I'd like to go through the worksheet if you just would give me 5 minutes. So on the top half, we're looking at revenues. And in the column, I'm comparing budget to last year's actual finish. So if I could simplify the report by just showing you current year. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to show you what we did last year over the same period. So we start off with revenues, and we're talking general fund, grants, and special education. So it's a big lump sum of income. So we're looking at, when we look at October, and you see that fiscal year to date, so we're looking at the end of October, where are we with revenues? And if we go to the bottom of the column, we're looking at $2.2 million of revenues received through October this year. It tells you where they're coming from, whether it's local taxes, state, federal, equipment sales, rebates, that kind of stuff. And then I look at the next two columns are kind of like the percent received. What percentage does that number represent? And what's the change from the same period the previous year? So that's the revenue side. Is it too much information? That's what I'd like to know. I could strip it all down and give you just 1 year's worth. But for me, when I look at it, I'm thinking, hey, this is a one-page document that's showing you essentially almost 7,000 different account codes lumped into one big sum. So now if we go down to the bottom half, we're looking at expenses. And what I want the board to understand is if we look at the $2.2 million in revenue, look what we had for expenses through the period. We're going through a period where our expenses are far exceeding our revenue.
It's because you're not bringing in taxes till January.
And equalization aids, sure.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's important as a board member that the reason I want to develop a report like this and include it is over time, if you look at it, you'll start to see trends and you'll get a sense of where the district's position is. We ended the year with a healthy fund balance. We're going into the lowest period of this month. So by the end of the month, we'll be at our lowest financial point of the period. And I just want the board to get a sense of that over time. And then to be able to look quickly and say, how does that compare to last year? And I don't want the board to have to spend a whole lot of time, and I don't know that it needs to be a point of discussion. But if I submit this and I want to do it a month late, because if I don't, I don't have a way to capture all the revenues because there's journal entries that have to be made, and we do a total month end to gather this information. So I'd like to include it either in, I think just in the financial packet at the board meeting, and in the meantime between a Friday and a Tuesday, or even at the meeting, if the board members have questions about that report, you could direct them to me. But if this isn't something of interest or something you think is of value, I simply don't need to include it.
I found it valuable, and I appreciate you sharing that. It's a simplified version for me not doing anything close to what you do, so I appreciate it. That's my feedback. And thank you for doing that.
So Tim, you're saying you're gonna put it in,
You'll see the same report then, and if you want me to, I can eliminate it for, I could do it just the current year, so you wouldn't have to look at all the columns and see the difference. It's a report that I'm doing for you, not for me.
I like the comparables, that's my feedback.
yeah, I think we need that.
Do you need the variance column, or just as soon not have that in it?
I thought this was a very simplified, easy document to read, so if it's easy enough to keep, I would support it, but I'm only one person, so.
I think we want to go with this for a while at least, Tim, and if we discover we don't like something, we'll let you know.
Tim, what was Representative Felkowski's new budget clear school clearing, something that I didn't pay close attention to? What is that going to do differently for how you report to us or to DPI or?
I didn't pay attention to it, and I'm not aware of it.
Okay, something that Governor Evers just signed. Did anybody pay close attention? Something about how maybe the effective date must be a ways out. Okay, well check that out and let me know.
It was just signed over the weekend, wasn't it?
Yeah, I saw it on Facebook, but did you read anything? I can't.
I just perused it, too little to make comment.
We can find out, hopefully, and put it and we can review.
That's great.
Yeah, something about the premise was it was supposed to make it easier for board members and staff and parents to know where the money was going, but how that was going to be accomplished.
Okay. Then we'll move on to item G, Auditor Services Request for Proposals.
So this is one where I'm going to be asking you to take action at the November meeting. And we put out an RFP for audit services. And we had a 3-year agreement that we extended beyond 1 year because I didn't realize the agreement was up. But we solicited regionally to 3 vendors, 3 audit firms, and only 2 responded. And you have the information there. And what's difficult for me is we were with Schenck. Schenck was acquired by CLA. So CLA is one of the firms that responded. The other one was Kerber Rose. And Kerber Rose purchased Bredigan, Smits, and Novak a couple years ago. And they have an audit side of the business, which is out of Rhinelander and Shawano. It wouldn't be staff from Anago doing it. Their number's a little bit lower. If you look at the details on that sheet, they gave us a pretty hefty discount. One of my concerns, though, when you open up that information is the significant difference in the hours required to perform the audit. So my first thoughts would be CLA is more expensive as a first look, but they're also doing significantly more hours of investigation. So the audit is really the board's snapshot on how the business office is performing their duties. So it's really something of your concern more so than mine. It's nice when I get an auditor that is easy to work with, but more importantly to you, it's what does the audit report say of the operation. But what makes the data a little difficult, and I still haven't figured out which firm is the one I would recommend, is there's something called a single audit. And what a single audit does is when you receive federal money, the government says they want to know whether you spent it according to the guidance provided by the federal program. So in our case, the Department of Education wants to know that any money we receive from federal is spent according to allowable costs. Well, because we receive, particularly with gear, most years we have 2 programs that get single audits. Some years we have 3. Because we're receiving so much federal money, the government says anytime you receive more than $750,000 in any single program, you have to have a single audit. So when you look at that, CLA, it's all included. Kerber Rose, it's roughly $2,500 per program. So when you get to 3 program single audits, the cost is pretty equivalent. So I want to look at that a little further, and I also want to get some reference checking on the audit team that they're recommending to perform our audit if they should be chosen, and I'll have that recommendation for you next month.
Tim, just if my memory's right, when we looked at last year's budget, when it came in, and did you say there was a mistake made by the auditor in Fund 73? Was that the fund?
It was, Dave, but it was actually made by the actuarial, and the audit, CLA, the audit firm, found the error.
Okay, then that's better. Okay, because I was going, if it was the auditor, I was going to say, is it one of these two? And if it was, I would say, well, then we maybe need to consider the other. But since the one who caught it, which one was that?
CLA.
Okay.
The other final note is, prior to the acquisition, we were struggling with Schenck to get the audit report filed with DPI. And DPIs can hold back equalization aid if the reports aren't filed in a timely manner. So that is my major concern with anytime we have delays in reporting. So we'll give you a recommendation in 2 weeks.
Does Kerber Rose do a bunch of school audits, or would this be a new thing for them? Versus CLA must do a bunch, right?
I think at one point in time there were multiple, like I know that talking with Tim Sharon when they were locally owned, Tim started out his career doing school audits for Bredigan, Smits, and Novak. And then it became with all the omnibus circulars that are required for school reporting and federal reporting. It just became too onerous. So firms are specializing in that area. So Kerber Rose is trying to develop more into that market. And in fact, in our region, they bought some business from Whitley. So.
Okay. So we'll have the recommendation for us at the next meeting. We'll go on to item H, replacement of Aquatic Center sand filters.
Jake unfortunately had, I think he had a coaching engagement, wasn't able to make it tonight. We started looking at this project back in, I want to say June or July, and I was hoping that we would have at least discussion about the project details. So right now what we have is we haven't let the project yet, to my knowledge. There was a little problem with Raymaker and Associates is an engineering firm that's designing the project out of Saukville. And they have the design all set. We're ready to go with bidding. It was a matter of getting the bid documents together that would meet Mary Ponasek's spring activity schedule. And those details haven't been worked out. It's a pretty straightforward project. We've extended it to include doing some additional work in the filter room. And we will have a bid tally for you to go at the next meeting.
Okay. And then we'll go on to item I, information technology cybersecurity update.
Hi. This is more of a small caption of what we're dealing with cybersecurity. Ransomware, malware, I mean, everybody's heard of these items, but nobody's really understood them too much. Then CISA, that CISA is part of the Homeland Security system, which does send out, unfortunately, constant emails about what can be looked at, what should be looked at, what needs to be updated, I mean, where they would send out reports of things that you should be updating because there's been hacks already been done to them. People go in and redo the codes so that they make them more vulnerable. So that's been very helpful, annoying but very helpful at times. So what I'm proposing in doing is not really proposals, but what I'm going to start doing is, because we've had our firmware and our hardware and everything up to date to a certain point now, is I want somebody else to come in and look at what we're doing to make sure that we're at our top level of security. We've been contracted with Camera Corner Connecting Point out of Green Bay for the last 7 to 10 years for our certified network engineering. And they've helped me set up the network the way it is and set up all the securities and and I've been in contact with them that I'm doing this so it's not a surprise to them. But I want a third party to actually look at what we've been doing and how we're set up, and to make sure that our security is as best as it can be. So this is more of an informational thing of what I'm doing and why I want to do it. The initial cost, I want to say it was like $5,000 for them to come in and check our network and then do a vulnerability scan. So once the network has been gone over, which will take, they said, between 25 and 30 days, then the vulnerability scan will come into effect. And that's what I'm more important is looking at, is what do we look like from the outside in? Can somebody get into us? How easy it is to get into our systems, if they can at all. So it's more of a preemptive strike than instead of waiting. The cybersecurity stuff that I've gone to, it's more of not, if, it's when. So I want to try and hold that when off as long as possible. So, so like I said, this is more of an informational thing that I wanted to bring to you to that what we are doing and why we're doing it. So if there's any questions about that part.
Okay, I don't have any questions, but anybody else? Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go on to possible action items, and item A is consideration to approve technology purchase.
Okay, Dave.
Yeah,
Dave.
the Khajiits we've already purchased, but I wanted to put this on there because the whole package that I'm showing you on this is part of that ECF fund. It's another government project that they're funding school districts to try and bridge that gap of the haves and have-nots. Who doesn't have a device at home and who doesn't have internet access at home? They're providing us with money to keep that gap as low as possible. So I would like to be able to order this stuff as soon as possible, because the contacts that I'm having is that anything after January 1st, it's really, who knows when you're going to get it. So the Chromebooks, I know that vendor has said if we can get them ordered tomorrow after getting okay tonight, if we do, then he would almost guarantee them they would be in here by the end of the year. And we would just store them and work them into the system as we can. But this stuff is basically my next year's replacement parts, but I want to get them ordered so that we're not waiting in August and September to get them. Okay. So, otherwise, they say that it'll be months before we get any of this stuff if we wait too much longer. The ECF funding will almost pay for the whole thing. So we're basically going to get all this stuff for basically $0 once we get the reimbursement. We'll have to put the money up for it at front, but then we'll get reimbursed for it. And I'm saying almost all of it because we have to prove that we've handed the devices out. Chromebooks we'll have to keep track of for a 3-year track of what student has what Chromebook. So if we get audited, they know where that device is at that given point. The Khajiits, they'll only give you the money back for the ones you've handed out. So they're not going to give you a blanket $200 Khajiits. It's only for you prove how many you've handed out at this given point, and that's what they'll give you the reimbursement for.
Feeling the pressure from obvious comments to my right. I move the board approve the purchase of 60 iPads from Apple for a total of $17,640 and 560 Chromebooks with licenses from CDW for a total of $149,480.80.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion?
I just want to say I didn't know Dave felt pressure.
It was me.
Mary, it was Mary.
It was me. I just didn't want him to feel bad that he missed his opportunity. We can move this along.
Okay, no further discussion. We'll go ahead with the roll call.
Bardo,
Yes.
Deep,
Yes.
Gagnon,
Yes.
Maddox Nelson,
Yes.
Newfeld,
Yes.
Pyatt,
Yes.
Schrader,
Yes.
Mary.
Yes. Okay, we'll go on to item B, consideration to approve an overnight stay.
I move the board approve the overnight stay at the Antigo Hockey Rink for the high school hockey team on Friday, November 12, 2021.
Second?
Any questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes. And we'll go on to item C, report of employee resignations or retirements.
I move the board accept the following resignations: Bobby Lewis, food service, Lawrence Walters custodian, and Amy Sovinsky, high school administrative assistant.
Second.
Any questions or comments here? And all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and we'll go on to the report of district new hires.
I move the board approve the following new hires: Amanda Moore, mental health referral coordinator, and Gerald Roden, high school English teacher.
Second. Go ahead.
Any questions or comments here? Then we do a roll call.
I think we should change our rules so we can have a second and allow a third.
Deep,
Yes.
Gagnon,
Yes.
Maddox Nelson,
Yes.
Newfeld,
Yes.
Pyatt,
Yes.
Schrader,
Yes.
Mary,
Yes.
and Bardo.
Yes.
We'll just go ahead and confirm that the next meeting will be Tuesday, December 14th. And with that, we can have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Mr. In the time frame.